There's a reason some people never book isolated cabins in winter, never stop for strangers on the highway at night, and never open their doors when screams echo through their hallway. They've heard what happens to the ones who do. On Haunted Fears tonight, in 3 Winter Nights That Still Haunt Me, you're going to hear from people who thought they were just taking a quiet trip, a late-night drive, or minding their own business at home, until something started watching them from just a few feet away. You'll feel the slow footsteps circling a remote cabin, the weight of a hitchhiker who swears she won't be in here long, and the kind of hallway screams that make you realize the scariest thing isn't the monster, it's how many doors stay closed. As you listen, ask yourself, when the knocking reaches your side of the wall, will you open the door, or turn the volume up and pretend you heard nothing? If you're ready to go deeper into the dark with the Haunted Fears horror family, hit subscribe, turn on the bell, and don't watch this one alone. My name is Owen, and I still don't know if what happened at that cabin was a joke, a warning, or someone slowly working up the courage to come inside. The worst part is how normal everything else was, how safe it all looked, while something circled just out of sight. I rented the cabin because I wanted to be alone on purpose. Not the casual, I need a weekend off alone, but the kind where you drive so far into the woods the radio turns to static and you start memorizing the last gas station you saw, just in case you need to find your way back in a hurry. It was early winter, the kind where the snow looks pretty from a distance, but the air stings your lungs if you breathe too deeply outside. The listing made it look perfect. A single-story wooden place with big windows, good heating, reliable power, and a host who promised the area stayed quiet and private year-round. Inside, everything was set up to make you relax. The heater hummed with a low, steady sound. The lights were warm, not the harsh kind you get in motels, but softer, almost like the kind you see in staged living room photos. There was a thick rug in front of the couch, a tiny fireplace that was more decorative than necessary, and a big window looking out toward a line of dark trees. From the first minute, the cabin felt almost too prepared for someone like me, like it knew what kind of city-burned guest would walk in needing to believe in peace and silence for a few days. The first day passed the way you wish life always would. I cooked something simple, watched my breath fog the glass when I first stepped outside, and then retreated quickly when my fingers went numb faster than I expected. The storm was already building by dusk. The wind picked up and started pushing against the walls with little bursts, making the whole place creak in slow, complaining sounds. It felt sturdy, though. The power worked fine. The heat held steady. The Wi-Fi was surprisingly strong. There was no sense of danger. Just a reminder that outside those walls, the cold didn't care whether I was comfortable or not. That first night, sleep came easily. There's a special kind of quiet out there, a silence that's not actually silent. It's full of small movements, branches shifting, the low hiss of wind sliding through the trees, the occasional soft thump of snow falling from a higher branch onto a lower one. I drifted off to that strange soundtrack, half expecting to wake up every hour from unfamiliar noises, but instead sinking deeper than I had in months. It was the second night when I started hearing the footsteps. They were faint at first, barely more than a suggestion beneath the wind, just a light, measured crunch somewhere outside the bedroom wall, like someone stepping carefully on the crust of new snow. I told myself it was just the storm changing direction, pressing branches along the side of the cabin. That made sense. It was the kind of explanation that lets you keep your body relaxed under the blanket even while your mind pricks up its ears. The sound came again. Closer this time, sliding along the edge of the wall that faced the trees. A slow, dragging rhythm. Step, wait, subtle scrape, not the skittering of animals. No quick, erratic movement. It moved as if whoever was out there knew exactly where the walls were and was walking a slow, deliberate path around them. I held my breath and listened harder, straining to separate the noise from the wind's constant push. The pattern repeated, circled, and then faded. After a while, I convinced myself I had imagined it and fell back asleep. In the morning, I laughed it off. That kind of laugh you use to push fear away before it has time to settle into your chest. I made coffee, warmed my hands around the mug, and stared out the big window at the solid blanket of snow. No footprints, no trails, just a smooth, untouched surface with soft drifts built up along the bottom of the walls. The wind must have covered any marks, I thought, or there had never been any in the first place. I thought about calling the host then, just to check if there were any maintenance workers or neighbors who might have a reason to walk near the place at night. I even picked up my phone and scrolled to the message thread. The signal was perfectly fine. Full bars. Nothing was stopping me but the idea of how that conversation would sound. "Hey, I heard footsteps outside last night. Did you see anyone?" "No." "Any damage? Any evidence?" "No." It felt like inviting someone else to judge how paranoid I was, so I locked the screen and put the phone face down on the table. Day 2 went by without incident. I read, cooked, and pretended not to notice how the wind was getting angrier as night approached. By the time I went to bed, the storm was in full swing. Gusts hit the walls in short, violent bursts, making the glass in the big window shudder in tiny, frantic vibrations. I reminded myself the cabin had survived countless storms before I'd shown up, and that thinking the weather cared I was there made me sound self-centered and stupid. The footsteps started again around midnight. This time, there was no mistaking them. They started near the front corner of the cabin, where the porch wrapped around a bit, and moved in a slow arc toward the back. Crunch, pause, crunch. A longer drag, like something heavy being shifted. My heart climbed up into my throat as I lay there staring at the dark line of the ceiling, listening to whoever was outside trace the perimeter of my temporary home. I could picture them in my head without meaning to. A dark shape against the snow, breath steaming, head slightly tilted as they listened for movement inside. I told myself to get up, to look, to prove or disprove whatever my brain was creating. But my body didn't want to move. Lying still felt safer, like any shift of weight or rustle of fabric might signal to whoever was out there that someone was awake, listening. The sound continued along the side wall, then toward the back, then paused near the bedroom window. There was a soft, sharp tap on the glass, so faint it could have been a branch, but placed exactly where my eyes were already staring. I stopped breathing altogether. Minutes passed, or maybe it was seconds stretched into something longer by fear. Eventually, the sound moved on. The last thing I heard was a long, strange scrape near the back wall, like something being drawn through the snow in one continuous motion. Then only wind again. In the morning, I told myself I was done being afraid of things I hadn't confirmed. I got dressed, pulled on my jacket, triple-checked that the heater and lights were all working normally, and opened the front door. The cold hit me like a slap, forcing the air out of my lungs. The snow was brighter than I expected, the low winter sun bouncing off it in sharp, blinding flashes. I stepped down carefully, boots sinking deep, and walked around the side of the cabin. There were no footprints, at least, not the way I expected. Most of the snow around the walls looked relatively smooth, windswept and built up, with no clear shoe marks or animal tracks. But along the back wall, running in a straight line from one corner to the other, there was a single, long, shallow groove. It looked like someone had dragged a stick or a finger or something else slowly through the snow without lifting it once. It hugged the base of the wall in a way that didn't feel random. It felt like tracing. I followed it with my eyes, feeling the skin on the back of my neck tighten. When I reached the middle of the wall, where the bedroom sat on the other side, something else caught my attention. The lower part of the bedroom window was fogged from the inside, the way glass does when warm air presses against cold. But low on the outside of the glass, about knee-height, there was a shape where frost had thinned in a distinct pattern. 5 slightly spaced marks and a broader palm-shaped smear. It looked like a handprint pressed from the outside. I stood there longer than I should have, squinting, trying to decide if it was really that clear or if my brain was forcing the image. But the more I stared, the more undeniable it became. The handprint rested right under where my eyes had been in the dark, staring out without moving. Someone had been close enough to reach out and touch the glass while I lay there pretending I was invisible. My phone felt like a weight in my pocket. I could call the host. I could call the police. I could at least take a picture. But another part of me kept whispering that I had no real proof anything was wrong. There was no broken lock, no smashed window, No threatening message scrawled anywhere. Just a line in the snow and a shape on the glass that wind and sun would erase by afternoon. Out here, those signs would sound small, like the kind of thing a nervous guy from the city would overreact to because he wasn't used to how nature and cold and old wood behaved. I went back inside without calling anyone. The third night, I tried to be rational. I left more lights on, kept the curtains half closed, and moved around the cabin more than I needed to, as if normal activity might anchor me to something safe. I turned the TV up, then turned it down again so I could hear outside better. I picked up my phone more than once, thumb hovering over the host's number, replaying possible conversations in my head. Every version made me sound ridiculous. The footsteps started later that night, closer to 1 in the morning. This time, they didn't circle the cabin right away. They started and stopped in shorter bursts, like whoever was out there was testing the snow, shifting weight slowly. Then, after a longer pause, the path around the walls began just like before. Measured, deliberate, unhurried. The sound did not belong to someone lost or in a hurry. It belonged to someone who knew exactly where they were. I forced myself out of bed. Each step from the bedroom to the main room felt like moving through water, heavy and slow. I kept the overhead lights off and only the small lamp by the couch on, so my reflection wouldn't be obvious in the big window. The heater hummed steadily, a reminder that nothing inside was failing. My phone sat on the table, screen dark, a lifeline I refused to touch out of pure stubbornness. I stopped a few feet from the window, heart beating loud enough I was sure it could be heard outside. The footsteps crunched closer along the outer wall, then shifted toward the front, near the window. The storm had eased a bit, making the separate sounds stand out more clearly. I could hear breathing, or maybe it was just the wind forcing itself around the frame, but it timed too neatly with each pause in the footsteps. I stared at the lower part of the glass, where that handprint had been that morning, and waited. The figure never came fully into view. Instead, something long and thin slid slowly up along the bottom of the window from below the frame, leaving a narrow, dark line in the fresh frost. Not a hand this time. It moved too smoothly, never breaking contact. The line rose, stopped halfway up the glass, and hovered there. Whoever was holding it stayed just out of sight, shielded by the edge of the wall and the angle of the porch roof. My mouth went dry. I wanted to shout, to slam a hand against the window and demand to know what they wanted, but some animal part of me understood that acknowledging them would cross a line I could never uncross. Right now, they were a presence, a possibility. If I reacted, I would be participating in whatever they were doing. The line on the glass slid back down and disappeared. The footsteps retreated, circling the cabin once more in a deliberate, unbroken loop. Then, nothing but wind. I didn't sleep the rest of the night. I stayed on the couch, phone in hand, staring at the door and listening for the smallest sound. Every creak of wood felt like a foot on a floorboard. Every sigh of the heater sounded like someone exhaling near my ear. By dawn, my eyes burned, my muscles ached, and my resolve to pretend nothing was wrong had completely eroded. That morning, I finally called the host. I stumbled through the story in a low, shaky voice, trying to keep it logical. 2 nights of footsteps, a long drag line in the snow along the back wall, something like a handprint on the bedroom window, a line traced in the frost from outside while I was awake and watching. I left out how scared I'd actually been, how I had frozen instead of acting, how I had been more afraid of sounding crazy than of the person walking outside my walls. The host listened quietly and then let out a soft, almost amused breath. "Yeah," they said. "Locals sometimes mess with tourists up there in winter. Bored kids, drunk idiots, that kind of thing. They know people come out expecting spooky wilderness vibes, so they lean into it. As long as no one's trying the doors or breaking anything, you're fine. Just ignore anyone wandering around at night up there." There it was, the answer I'd been afraid of, the one that turned everything into a joke at my expense. If I pushed back, if I insisted that this was different, that the line in the snow and the touch on the glass meant something, I'd shift from nervous guest to problem guest in their mind. So I said I understood. I thanked them. I hung up. I left the next morning anyway. The drive back felt longer than the drive there, like the road itself was stretching to keep me in the woods. By the time I hit the first real cluster of houses and gas stations, Some of the tension had melted out of my shoulders, but not all of it. Back in the city, surrounded by noise and people and lights that never really go out, the cabin already felt like a story I might have made up, something I could file away under weird experiences and drag out at parties. Except on some winter nights, when the first real snow hits and starts to stick, I find myself drifting toward the window without thinking. I look down at the edge of the glass, at that lower strip where frost sometimes gathers, and for a second I imagine a shape forming there from the outside, something tracing a line, or resting a hand just beneath where my eyes are. And every time, the same thought slides through my mind. Out there in the cold, someone might still be circling some other quiet cabin, walking those same slow loops, waiting for whoever is inside to decide whether they're just a bored local or something worse they will never quite believe themselves. My name is Emily, and I still see her sometimes when I'm driving alone at night, with the windows cracked and warm air rolling over my hands. Not her face, never her face. Not clearly, but the way she sat in my passenger seat like she was only borrowing the space for a few minutes before going. Where, exactly? I was driving back from a work trip that should have been forgettable, just another late-night commute between two small cities connected by a long stretch of highway and nothing in between. It was early autumn, the kind where the air is warm in the daytime but drops the second the sun disappears, leaving the road wrapped in a thin, orange-tinted haze from distant fields burning off old stalks, or someone's backyard leaf pile smoldering too long. I'd already made a couple of stops coffee at a 24-hour station with harsh fluorescent lights, a bathroom break at a rest area with a bulletin board full of local posters, lost dog notices, and a single missing person flyer. I barely glanced at it then, just enough to register a grayscale face, long dark hair, and a light jacket with a hood. Common enough that my brain filed it under background noise and moved on. The highway eventually stretched into that long, hypnotic nothing where your world shrinks to your headlights and the occasional pair of oncoming beams. The radio played low. My GPS glowed in that familiar soft blue, and my phone sat face down in the cup holder, buzzing every now and then with notifications I kept ignoring. The night felt dry and open, the sky a dull, starless smear above the road. That was when I saw her. At first, she was just a thin, vertical shape on the shoulder, barely a shadow against the guardrail where the asphalt blurred into gravel. As my car drew closer, the figure resolved into a person, a woman standing alone on that narrow strip of safety between the highway and a shallow ditch choked with weeds. No car, no bag, no obvious reason to be out there, just a long, zip-up jacket, the hood half up, and one arm lifted slightly, like she wasn't sure if it was worth trying to flag anyone down. My foot pressed a little harder on the gas out of reflex. Every self-defense article, every horror podcast, every late-night don't-be-stupid conversation with friends flickered through my mind in a rapid slideshow. Don't pick up hitchhikers. Don't stop on the shoulder if you can avoid it. Don't let a stranger into your car at night. It all sounded perfectly reasonable, logical, safe, and yet, as my headlights swept across her, something about the way she shifted her weight toward the lane punched right past all that logic. She turned her head just a bit as my car came level with her. All I really caught were impressions. Pale skin in the glare of my headlights, dark hair pulled forward by the breeze from passing cars, and a posture that didn't read like someone trying to trap anyone. No aggressive hand wave, no pounding on the air, just this stiff, contained kind of hope, like she'd already watched too many cars blow by her and was bracing to be ignored again. I passed her for about 3 seconds. Somewhere in those 3 seconds, my brain and my body stopped agreeing. My hands loosened on the wheel, my foot eased off the gas, and I watched her shrink in the rearview mirror until she was just a smudge under a flickering orange streetlight. I could have kept going and told myself a story later about how it was the smart choice. Instead, I checked my mirror's empty road behind me and eased onto the shoulder. The car rolled to a stop. Hazard lights clicked on automatically, bathing the asphalt in a soft, rhythmic amber. I could feel my heart picking up speed faster than the blink of the lights. For a second, I just sat there with my fingers hovering over the lock button, fighting with myself. Then I reached over and unlocked the doors. By the time I looked back up, she was already walking toward the car, like she'd known I'd stop eventually. She moved with a steady, unhurried pace, arms close to her sides, no wobble or obvious sign of injury. When she opened the passenger door, the interior light snapped on, and everything about the moment felt too bright, too exposed. "Thank you," she said, sliding in and pulling the door shut with a soft click. Her voice was surprisingly even. "I won't be in here long." Warm air rushed out of the car and was quickly replaced by the cooler air clinging to her clothes, carrying a faint smell of dry leaves and exhaust. Her jacket looked thinner up close, some generic brand with a fraying cuff and a faint stain near the zipper. Her hair was dark and straight, falling just past her shoulders, damp only at the ends like she had been walking for a while but not in rain. Her eyes, my memory refuses to give me a clear color. Dark enough to blend into the night. That's all I can hold on to. She didn't touch the seatbelt. I gave her a few seconds, waiting for that automatic, muscle memory reach everyone does the instant they sit in a car. It never came. She just folded her hands in her lap and stared through the windshield. "Hey," I said, trying for casual. "Could you put your seatbelt on?" She tilted her head a tiny bit but didn't look at me. "It's okay," she said. "I won't be in here long." Something about the phrasing brushed against my nerves. Not, "I'm not going far," not, "This is a short ride. I won't be in here long." Like the car itself was temporary, not the trip. The responsible, annoyed part of me wanted to insist. To stop until she strapped in. To lecture her about safety and police tickets and all that. But there was a stillness in her. A quiet density that made the idea of pushing her feel off. Picking that fight with a stranger alone on a dark highway suddenly seemed worse than just driving carefully. So I put the car in drive, checked my mirrors again, and eased back onto the lane. For the first few miles, we drove in silence. The highway unwound ahead of us in smooth, gray strips, sliced by broken white lines. Streetlights appeared and disappeared in intervals, casting the interior of the car in pulses of yellow and shadow. I could feel her presence more than I could see her, this compact point of gravity on my right side that my attention kept orbiting. "Where are you headed?" I asked finally. "Just up the road," she said after a short pause. "There's a turnoff. You can let me out there." "There's not much up ahead," I said. I had checked the route earlier. "You got friends around here?" "That's okay," she replied, not really answering. "I won't be in here long." The repetition made the back of my neck tighten. My mind flashed back to the rest stop bulletin board. The missing person flyer. Long hair, light jacket. The words, "Last seen near highway," printed above a phone number. I tried to recall the photo in detail, but my memory coughed up only a vague contour, a young face, neutral expression, generic clothes. It could have been anyone. It could have been her. "Did your ride leave you out there?" I asked. "Car trouble? Or—" Her lips moved in a tiny shape that might have been a smile but never made it to her eyes. "I wasn't driving," she said. "I just needed to get back." "Back where?" I pressed, more curious now than cautious. She shifted her gaze just enough that I could feel it graze my profile. "It's not far," she said. "You'll see the turnoff." My GPS showed nothing upcoming but a mild bend in the road. No exits, no rest areas, just maybe a few thin gray lines that represented local farm roads. The radio muttered quietly, some late-night DJ talking between songs about nothing important. A notification slid across my phone screen and disappeared before I could read it. The space inside the car felt strange, not colder, not exactly, just compressed, like the cabin air was thickening, making each breath a tiny bit more noticeable. "There," she said suddenly, lifting one hand and pointing ahead. I squinted. Up ahead, the guardrail dipped, and a narrow, unmarked lane split off from the highway, sloping downward between overgrown brush and a couple of dusty reflector posts. No lights, no sign, no painted lines. It looked like the kind of service or access road maintenance crews would use and everyone else would ignore. My GPS didn't recognize it at all. "I can let you off at the next gas station instead," I said carefully. "It's safer there, more people around. This looks like a pretty bad spot." "It's fine," she said, hand returning to her lap. "Just pull over near that turn. I told you, I won't be in here long." All those earlier warnings surged back at once, louder this time. Side road, no lights, Stranger, no seatbelt, weird phrasing, every detail stacked up into a shape my brain labeled danger, even though she wasn't doing anything overtly threatening. I don't feel comfortable stopping there, I admitted, my voice tighter than I wanted. I'll take you a bit farther, somewhere lit. Okay? You can get out whenever you want, once we're off this stretch. For the first time since she'd gotten into the car, I saw something flare behind her eyes. It wasn't anger exactly, more like disappointment, or maybe annoyance, aimed at something bigger than me. Her shoulders dropped a fraction. Her jaw flexed once. You don't have to go that far for me, she said softly. I told you, I won't be in here long. I kept driving. We passed the unmarked lane. My jaw ached from clenching it. The highway ahead straightened out again, dotted with a few distant red taillights far in the distance. A green sign flashed by, announcing a town name and an exit in a few miles. I latched onto that exit like it was a promise. I glanced at the GPS, then at the speedometer, then unable to resist toward the passenger seat. It was empty. No jacket, no hair, no imprint in the fabric that looked any different from the usual slight dip of a seat that's been sat in hundreds of times. The seatbelt hung undisturbed, exactly where it always did. The faint leaf and exhaust smell that had slipped in when she entered was gone so completely it may as well have been imagined. My grip on the steering wheel spasmed. The car drifted half a foot before I yanked it gently back into the lane. My eyes started to burn, not from tears but from how wide I was forcing them open, like blinking might make space for something else to appear. I checked the back seat in the mirror. Nothing. Just the dark outline of my own head and shoulders, and a couple of grocery bags I'd forgotten to unpack at the start of the week. I drove the rest of the way to the next exit in a kind of tight, buzzing silence. Radio turned down so low, it was just a hum. When I pulled into the gas station lot, I parked crooked again, killed the engine, and just sat there for a long minute, listening to the cooling tick of the car. Inside, the clerk glanced up and gave the kind of minimal nod you give someone at 2 in the morning. The air smelled like burnt coffee and cleaning solution. On the wall near the restroom, there was another bulletin board and another missing person flyer. The picture was clearer here. A young woman, long dark hair, light jacket. The details tugged at something in my brain, but every time I tried to lock them in, something slid. The text said she'd gone missing months earlier, last seen being dropped off near a rural road off this same highway. The location name wasn't exactly where we'd been. The date didn't match tonight. The description of her clothes was close, but not precise enough to prove anything. Back home later, sitting on my couch with my laptop balanced on my knees, curiosity finally won over fear. I typed the town name and missing woman into a search bar and watched headlines populate the screen. Some were years old. Some were recent. One mentioned a body never found. Another talked about an abandoned car discovered near a side road with no explanation of where the driver went. The descriptions were always nearly, but not completely, what I remembered. I toggled between articles and images, searching for the exact face that had sat in my passenger seat. Sometimes I thought I'd found her, only to realize the nose was different, or the smile didn't match the barely there twitch I'd seen. Nothing lined up with that clean, satisfying click of certainty. At some point, I just closed the laptop. Maybe I picked up a real woman who quietly bailed when I was too focused on the road to notice, and my exhausted brain rewired the memory into something stranger. Maybe I never stopped at all, and the whole scene was some weird, waking dream held together by that rest stop flyer. Or maybe there's someone out there who never made it to wherever back was, and now spends her nights stepping into the cars of people who are just soft-hearted or foolish enough to slow down. Either way, when I'm driving alone at night now and see a figure on the shoulder, my hands don't argue with my instincts anymore. I keep my eyes ahead, my doors locked, and I tell myself I learned my lesson, because whatever I let into my car that night, it wasn't in there long, but it's been with me ever since. My name is Alexander, and some nights I lie awake counting the doors in my hallway like they're sins. Every number has a voice attached to it now, but one door carries a sound I will never be able to unhear, no matter how loud I turn up my TV or how many excuses I stack between myself and that night. I moved into the building because it was boring. That was the main selling point. Beige hallways, cheap carpet with a pattern that tried and failed to hide stains, the low hum of old heaters that never completely turned off. The ceilings were just high enough to feel like an apartment and not a basement, and the windows faced a parking lot lit by tired street lamps. Nothing about the place screamed danger. It barely managed to whisper personality. That was exactly what I wanted. Neighbors came and went, and I got good at the polite micro-interactions of shared spaces. A nod in the lobby. A "hey man" in the laundry room. A quick thanks when someone held the front door. I learned little fragments. The guy in 3B watched sports too loud. The woman in 3D walked an anxious dog that clicked its nails on the linoleum. The older couple at the end of the hall cooked with a lot of garlic. No one offered deep details. No one asked for them. The building ran on mutual, intentional distance. My apartment, 3F, sat right in the middle of the third floor. If I opened my door and stepped out, I could see all the way down to the fire door at one end and the elevator at the other. The lights in the hallway were always on thin, fluorescent tubes behind plastic covers that buzzed lightly but never flickered. The smoke detectors had those tiny green LEDs that blinked every few seconds, reminding you they were watching without caring. It felt safe, in that bland, unexamined way. The night everything happened started as aggressively normal. I remember because it was one of those evenings where I was determined to do absolutely nothing. I had microwaved something frozen and forgettable, dropped onto my couch, and let a true crime docuseries autoplay in the background while I scrolled through my phone. The heater in the corner made its soft, metallic ticking sound. The TV threw blue light on the walls. A pot clanged faintly in some other apartment. The building was alive in that low, domestic hum. The first sound didn't even register as important. It was a voice in the hallway, sharp, clipped, maybe a little louder than usual. The kind of thing you half hear through a door and file as somebody annoyed about something. It could have been a neighbor arguing about late rent, a delivery person knocking too many times, one roommate scolding another. It didn't spike my adrenaline. I registered it. Registered that it was male, controlled but tight, and then my attention slipped back to my screen. The second time the voice cut through, it was harder to ignore. I paused the TV without even thinking, thumb hovering over my phone. The words were muffled, but the tone had sharpened. Still not shouting, but with that edge people get when they're holding themselves back from shouting. It sounded like it was coming from a few doors down, on my side of the hall. There was another, softer response, a higher voice, quieter, barely audible through the walls. I stayed sitting. That's the part that sticks in my throat now. How easy it was to just stay put. I told myself it was a private argument. I told myself I didn't know the context. I told myself it would be weird to open my door and stand there like a hall monitor. My own TV show about a real case was still frozen mid-scene, where an interviewer was talking about all the neighbors who hadn't wanted to get involved. The irony didn't move me off the couch. Then something heavy hit a wall. The sound jumped through the building like it had been wired into the structure itself. A solid, dense thud, followed by a rattle that told me something had fallen over, then another impact on the floor. It wasn't the sound of furniture being shifted gently. It was the sound of something being thrown, or someone. My body reacted before my brain decided anything. My heart sped up. I stood, suddenly aware of how thin my door was, how close other people were, how the hallway light seeped in at the bottom edge of the frame. I lowered the TV volume until it was just a murmur and stepped closer to the door, not opening it, just putting my ear near the wood. The man's voice was louder now. I still couldn't make out the exact words, but the cadence was different, no longer measured, more jagged, sentences cutting off and restarting. The higher voice responded, sharper this time, like someone who'd gone from placating to defending themselves. A second later, something else hit the wall, closer to the floor this time, followed by a sound that made the hairs on my arms stand up, a choked, involuntary cry. I took a step back from the door like the sound had pushed me. Inside my apartment, everything was still perfectly normal. The lights were bright. The heater hummed. My phone buzzed with a notification. The world outside that door could have been on mute, and my room would have stayed in its little pocket of comfort. If the power had gone out, if the hallway had gone dark, if there had been some obvious, "this is an emergency" signal, maybe it would have jolted me into action, but the electricity was fine. The building, by every visible measure, was functioning exactly as it always did. The next sound was unmistakable. A scream. It was raw, not theatrical. The kind of noise a throat makes when the body forgets to be embarrassed about volume. It burst down the hallway like a flare, bouncing off doors and cheap paint. Underneath it, the man's voice barked something I still couldn't parse. Two overlapped with the scream to separate. I flinched, my heart hammering in my chest, hand flying to the lock on my door without any plan for what I'd do with it. Open, deadbolt it, yell through it, call someone. From somewhere farther down the hall, a different sound drifted in, a sizzling, popping noise, and the sharp, familiar smell of onions frying. The scent curled under my door, strong and homey, crowding in on the metallic taste of adrenaline in my mouth. Someone was cooking dinner. Someone had a pan on the stove, oil hot, food browning, life continuing as if no one else was screaming 20 feet away. The clash of those two realities did something weird to my brain. I remember thinking, if they aren't reacting, maybe it's not that bad. I cracked my door, just an inch, letting the bright hallway light pour in, a line slicing across my carpet. The sound snapped louder, more immediate. The man's voice, the sobbing or gasping responses, the impact of something else hitting a wall, a door, the floor. The frying smell intensified, making it all feel wrong, like a domestic soundtrack laid over a scene it didn't belong to. Doors remained closed. At the far end of the hall, the older couple's TV bled through their door, some game show audience clapping and laughing. Near the elevator, someone's music thumped faintly, a bass line seeping into the building's bones. The exit sign over the stairwell glowed red, steady and calm. The ceiling lights hummed. The little green smoke detector LEDs blinked in their usual, indifferent rhythm. I stood there, hand on my doorknob, stuck on that threshold. There was a part of me yelling inside my head. Do something. Knock. Yell. Call downstairs. Call the police. Document it. Anything. Another part whispered, counter-arguments just as fast. You don't know what's going on. Maybe it's a bad breakup, and you'll make it worse. What if you misinterpret everything? What if you turn a tense situation into something violent by barging in? What if they all think you're nosy or crazy? Another scream cut through, higher, strangled. This time it was followed by a series of dull, repetitive thumps, like a body being shoved against something hard. Then came a new sound, an unsettling, irregular scraping, like something being dragged over carpet. Not smooth, not rhythmic. Stop-start. A slide, a pause, a heavier pull. My stomach turned. Without fully deciding to, I stepped into the hallway and shut my door behind me. The move felt huge, like crossing some invisible line. The noise came from 3 doors down, from an apartment I realized I had never seen anyone go in or out of except a woman once, carrying groceries and keeping her head down. I didn't know her name. I didn't know who else, if anyone, lived there. I walked toward it, each step feeling too loud in the quiet between bursts of chaos. As I passed the door of the older couple, the smell of frying onions hit me full force. I could hear a pot lid rattling, a muffled voice from a TV show. They were right there. So close I could have knocked and asked, "Do you hear this?" Instead, I kept moving. Outside the problem door, the sounds were almost unbearable. The man's voice was a harsh hiss now, peppered with curses and clipped syllables. The other voice was raw, hoarse, either crying or begging, I couldn't tell which. The dragging sound came again, something heavy being moved across the floor. I raised my fist to knock, and froze. What if the door opened, and I was staring at someone in the middle of something that couldn't be explained away? What if they pulled me in? What if they turned that rage outward, toward me, just for seeing it? The hallway suddenly felt very empty. I realized that if this person could do whatever they were doing with the door closed and neighbors ignoring it, they might feel confident that no one would step in if they targeted me, too. My hand dropped. I backed away, heart pounding so hard I could feel it in my fingertips. I walked quickly back to my apartment, shut the door, and flipped the deadbolt, as if that thin strip of metal could keep out the guilt already seeping under the threshold. Inside, nothing had changed. My paused show stared back at me. The heater ticked. The lamps glowed. My phone waited patiently on the coffee table. I grabbed it with shaking hands and opened the dialer, thumb hovering over 9. Another scream, muffled by 2 walls now. I hesitated. What do you even say? I thought. Hi. I think something bad might be happening in my building, but I don't know for sure, and I'm kind of scared. And also, I didn't do anything for the last 10 minutes while it was happening. I pictured officers arriving, taking statements, asking concrete questions I didn't have satisfying answers to. I pictured them knocking on my neighbors' doors for corroboration, and those doors staying closed. I put the phone down. The screams went on for what felt like hours, but was probably minutes. They changed shape, less sharp, more broken, fading in and out. The man's voice grew more clipped, like he was running out of words and patience, relying on sounds instead of sentences. The dragging noise continued in uneven bursts. Something knocked heavily against the shared wall with the unit across the hall. From somewhere, a microwave beeped. A faucet turned on. Someone laughed, distant and oblivious, at something on TV. Bit by bit, the noise slowed. The screams turned into low, indistinct sounds, then just dull thumps, then nothing. The silence that followed wasn't clean. It was stained by everything that had come before. I sat there on my couch, not breathing properly, waiting for some external cue that this was being handled. Sirens, heavy boots on stairs, raised voices in the hallway with authority in them. None came. The building systems did their jobs flawlessly. The lights stayed on. The heaters hummed. The TVs played. The cooking smells rose and faded. Life reassembled itself over the gap like spackle covering a hole. I slept badly that night, if you could call it sleep. Every time I drifted off, my brain replayed the sequence on loop. The first raised voice, the heavy impacts, the scream, the dragging. In my dreams, my door never opened. Sometimes, in those half-formed nightmare flashes, the sound stopped because whatever had been dragged had reached my door. Morning came like an accusation. I got dressed for work in a daze, went through the motions, and opened my door with my stomach clenched. The hallway looked exactly the same. Beige carpet, buzzing lights, exit sign blinking its steady red. The only new detail was a faint trace of something sharp in the air near that door. Under the fading scent of last night's cooking, a metallic tang that might have been my imagination. There were no police, no yellow tape, no landlord hovering with keys, and a worried face. Just a few neighbors leaving at their usual times, eyes sliding past each other with practiced disinterest. I looked at the door where the sounds had come from and saw absolutely nothing unusual. No cracks, no dents, no marks on the frame. Whoever lived there did not emerge. I went to work. I said nothing. Days passed. Once, I saw the older couple from down the hall at the mailboxes. The smell of onions and spices still clung faintly to their coats. We nodded at each other. The woman made a small comment about the weather. Her voice didn't shake. Her eyes didn't flicker. If she'd heard anything that night, she hid it as well as I was trying to. At night, the building continued its routines. People cooked, laughed, fought over small things. TVs muttered. Footsteps moved up and down the stairs. But from that particular unit, there was only silence. A week later, I came home from work and found the landlord in the hallway with a dolly and a man I didn't recognize. The door that had stayed shut was propped wide open. I slowed down, heart thudding, and pretended to be checking my keys so I could look without obviously staring. The inside of the unit looked ordinary. There were some boxes stacked near the entrance, a rolled-up rug, a couple of flattened packing cartons. The mystery man was carrying out a lamp, then a chair. The landlord saw me and lifted his hand in a quick, bland greeting. "Everything okay?" I asked, hating how fake casual my voice sounded. "Yeah," he said easily. "Previous tenant broke their lease. Had to move out quick. Just emptying the unit so I can get it ready." He smiled, like this was good news. Another chance to fill a space. "Know anyone looking for a place?" I shook my head, muttered something non-committal, and slipped into my own apartment before my face could give anything away. The landlord didn't mention police, or damage, or complaints. There was no notice sent around the building. Emergency repair, incident, be aware, nothing. The story, as far as the official version went, was simple. Someone moved out. someone else would move in. Over the next few days, the sounds of cleaning and light construction filtered down the hall. A vacuum, a hammer tap, the quiet thud of a new mattress being dropped onto a bed frame. The hallway absorbed it all. Indifferent. I never saw the previous tenant. I never heard anything about them. A couple of weeks later, a young couple showed up with a small truck, carrying in plants and a TV and a cat carrier. They laughed as they juggled boxes, bumping the doorframe with their shoulders, apologizing to each other. They smelled like coffee and takeout. The landlord shook their hands and handed them keys. The door closed behind them. Life rearranged itself again. No one knocked on my door and asked, "Did you hear anything that night?" No one pulled me aside and accused me of staying silent. No one confessed to doing the same. The building took the noise, swallowed it, and moved on. But my apartment changed. The hallway, once background, became a constant presence in the edge of my awareness. Every time a voice rose, even for something harmless, my body tensed. Every time something dropped, even a pot or a shoe, my heart jumped. I kept the TV lower now, not higher, because part of me was afraid of not hearing something important. Worse, every time I saw that door, I replayed the moment when my hand had hovered in the air and then dropped. I started constructing alternate timelines in my head. In one, I'd knocked, and the noise had stopped, and someone had come to the door angry, and I'd had to decide whether to back down or call for help. In another, I'd called the police immediately, and they'd shown up in time to, what? Document? Intervene? Catch? In another, I'd banged on all the neighbors' doors, forced the hallway into being a shared space instead of a corridor of isolated islands. None of those timelines happened. The only one that exists is the one where I listened, hesitated, and did nothing. That's the thing about buildings like this. They're perfect places for everyone to decide it's someone else's job to act. The lights stay on, the heaters hum, TVs play. People fry onions and boil noodles and microwave leftovers while something awful is happening 15 feet away. Later, if anyone asks, they can say they didn't realize it was that serious. I can't even give myself that excuse. I realized. I knew. I felt it in the way my hands shook. Now, when I walk down that hallway, I count doors. 1, 2, 3. The one that used to be theirs. 4, 5, 6. Each one, a mouth that stayed shut. I wonder how many of us were standing on the other side of thin wood that night, ears pressed to the grain, hearts racing, and then chose silence. If you're listening to this in your room, or your car, or some dim corner with headphones in, there's a reason this story isn't about ghosts or demons, or things that go bump because they're not human. It's about the kind of horror that gets louder the more ordinary the world around it looks. The kind you can help stop or help hide just by doing nothing. So the next time you hear something in your hallway, or through your wall, or outside your door, and that cold feeling rises in your chest, remember this. The lights might be on, the power might be fine, but that doesn't mean someone else is going to handle it. Sometimes the most terrifying thing isn't the scream, it's how quiet everybody else stays. If you want more stories that peel back this kind of everyday horror, the kind hiding in apartments, highways, cabins, and places you think you know, make sure you subscribe to Haunted Fears, turn on the notifications, and share this with someone who needs a reminder that ignoring the screams doesn't make them stop.
This story, including the research script and editing, was completely created by me. Thank you for supporting original content.